What if the worst blind date in the city turned out to be the beginning of a love that money could never buy? On a chilly Thursday evening in downtown Chicago, Ethan Walker adjusted the sleeves of the only navy blazer he still owned, the fabric slightly worn at the elbows after years of weddings, funerals, and job interviews. He caught his reflection in the restaurant window before stepping inside, sighed quietly, and almost turned around. Blind dates weren't for men like him. They were for people with free weekends, polished careers, and futures that looked brighter than overdue utility bills. Ethan had none of those things. He had an old pickup with over 200,000 miles on the odometer, a modest apartment on the edge of the city, and an 8-year-old daughter named Lily who believed her father could fix almost anything except the sadness he sometimes carried behind his smile. He checked his watch. 7 o'clock exactly. His best friend had insisted he give life one more chance after years of quietly putting everyone else first. Ethan wasn't expecting romance. He was simply keeping a promise. Across the dining room, Charlotte Kensington closed the dating app on her phone and slipped it into her handbag. No one in the restaurant recognized the woman whose face regularly appeared on business magazine covers. Tonight there were no bodyguards, no tailored executive suits, no luxury car waiting at the curb. She wore a simple cream sweater, dark jeans, and almost no makeup, looking like any other professional, hoping an awkward evening might become an interesting story. After years of board meetings, billion-dollar negotiations, and endless introductions from men who admired her fortune more than her heart, she had created a fake profile under the name Claire. She wanted one evening where nobody knew the weight of her last name. When Ethan walked toward her table, she noticed his hesitant smile before she noticed anything else. His shoes had been carefully polished despite their age. His hands carried the faint marks of honest work. There was no expensive watch, no rehearsed confidence, and no attempt to impress her. "Claire," he asked gently. She smiled. "You must be Ethan." They shook hands, and for a brief second neither spoke. Around them, glasses clinked softly, conversations floated through the warm restaurant, and golden lights reflected against polished wood, making the room feel smaller than it really was. Ethan pulled out her chair before sitting across from her. "I'm sorry if I seem nervous," he admitted with a quiet laugh. "It's been a long time since I've done anything like this." Charlotte studied him with quiet curiosity. Most men spent the first 5 minutes listing achievements. Ethan apologized for being nervous instead. "Me too," she answered honestly, surprising even herself. Neither of them realized that before the night was over, everything they believed about love, success, and second chances would begin to change in ways neither fortune nor hardship could have predicted. The waiter returned with 2 glasses of water and a basket of warm bread, offering the familiar smile reserved for first dates that might become something more. Ethan thanked him with genuine kindness before sliding the bread toward Charlotte. "Please, you first," he said. She accepted a piece, watching him carefully. There was something refreshingly unguarded about him. He was not trying to impress her with expensive stories or carefully rehearsed confidence. Instead, he seemed determined simply to make sure she felt comfortable. "So," Charlotte asked with a gentle smile, "what do you enjoy when you are not working?" Ethan laughed softly. "Honestly, I am usually working. But when I am lucky enough to have a free afternoon, my daughter decides how we spend it." Charlotte tilted her head. "You have a daughter?" His face changed instantly. The tension in his shoulders disappeared, replaced by a warmth that could never be rehearsed. "Her name is Lily. She is 8 years old. She loves drawing horses, even though she has never actually ridden one. Every Saturday, we make pancakes together, and every Sunday, she convinces me that our old pickup can still beat the train to the crossing outside town. It never does, but she believes it might one day." Charlotte smiled before she realized she was smiling. She had attended charity galas worth millions of dollars, spoken before international investors, and negotiated acquisitions that changed entire industries. Yet nothing she had heard in years sounded as sincere as a father talking about breakfast with his little girl. "She must be very proud of you," Charlotte said quietly. Ethan looked down at the table for a moment before answering. "I hope so. I spent a lot of time worrying that I cannot give her everything she deserves." Children usually remember love more than luxury, Charlotte replied almost instinctively. Ethan nodded slowly. That is what I keep telling myself. Their meals arrived, filling the air with the comforting aroma of grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and freshly baked rolls. Outside, light snow drifted past the restaurant windows, softening the busy Chicago streets into something almost peaceful. For a few quiet moments, they simply enjoyed dinner, interrupted only by small conversations about favorite books, childhood memories, and places they hoped to visit one day. Charlotte noticed something unusual. Ethan never once asked where she worked. He never asked how much money she made, what neighborhood she lived in, or what kind of car she drove. Most first dates eventually wandered toward status. This one wandered toward family, gratitude, and ordinary moments that somehow felt extraordinary. Can I ask you something? Ethan finally said. Charlotte nodded. Why did you agree to meet a complete stranger? She considered the question longer than she expected. Because I was tired of meeting people who already believed they knew me. Ethan smiled gently. That makes two of us. Their eyes met across the candlelight, and an unexpected silence settled between them. It was not awkward. It was peaceful, the kind of silence that only appears when two people stop trying to perform and begin allowing themselves to be seen. Charlotte had planned to leave after an hour. Instead, without saying a word, she quietly asked the waiter if they could order dessert. The waiter returned carrying a slice of warm apple pie with 2 forks, and Ethan looked genuinely surprised. I thought you only ordered coffee, he said with a puzzled smile. Charlotte shrugged playfully. Life feels a little too short to skip dessert. Ethan laughed, the sound quiet but sincere, and for the first time that evening she noticed tiny lines at the corners of his eyes that only appeared when he smiled. They shared the pie without ceremony, talking about everything that had nothing to do with money. Ethan described growing up in a small Illinois town where neighbors still waved from front porches and children spent entire summers riding bicycles until the streetlights came on. Charlotte listened with unusual attention. Her childhood had unfolded inside private schools, business dinners, and carefully planned schedules. She had traveled the world before turning 18. Yet somehow Ethan's stories about catching fireflies with mason jars sounded richer than anything she remembered. Do you ever regret staying here? She asked softly. Ethan considered the question while stirring the last of his coffee. Sometimes I wonder what life might have looked like if I had made different choices. But then Lily laughs at one of my terrible jokes, or falls asleep during movie night with her head on my shoulder. And I remember that success is not always measured by what you own. Charlotte lowered her eyes. She had spent years chasing quarterly reports, international expansion, and headlines celebrating her achievements. Yet no magazine had ever described a moment that sounded as valuable as the one Ethan had just painted with a few simple words. The conversation drifted naturally toward family. Ethan spoke gently about losing his wife several years earlier, never asking for sympathy and never allowing grief to define her memory. Instead, he remembered her kindness, her optimism, and the promise they had once made to give Lily a childhood filled with love, even if life became unexpectedly difficult. Charlotte admired the quiet dignity in the way he honored the past without allowing it to steal the future. You must miss her every day, she whispered. Ethan nodded slowly. Duh. But loving someone also means continuing the life they wanted for you. I think she would be disappointed if I stopped believing that happiness could find us again. Those words settled into Charlotte's heart more deeply than she expected. She had met brilliant executives, decorated athletes, and influential politicians, but very few people carried wisdom with such humility. As the evening stretched beyond 2 hours, the restaurant gradually emptied. Soft jazz floated through hidden speakers while fresh snow covered the sidewalks outside in a quiet blanket of white. Ethan reached for the check before it arrived. Charlotte instinctively offered to split the bill, but he shook his head with a polite smile. Please let me. I invited you here. She noticed that his wallet contained only a few neatly folded bills, yet there was no hesitation in his gesture. He was not trying to appear wealthy. He was simply protecting his sense of responsibility. Charlotte quietly realized that the most generous people were often those with the least to spare. When they finally stepped outside, the cold evening air wrapped around them, and tiny snowflakes settled on Ethan's jacket. They stood together beneath the warm glow of the restaurant sign for a lingering moment that neither seemed eager to end. Then Ethan's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, and the tenderness that filled his face returned instantly. "It is Lily," he said with an apologetic smile. "She likes to call before bed every night, no matter where I am." Charlotte watched as he answered with unmistakable warmth. "Hey, sweetheart, did you remember to feed Mr. Whiskers?" The little voice on the other end made Ethan laugh again, and Charlotte found herself smiling without realizing that somewhere between dinner and dessert, she had already begun falling for the ordinary man standing quietly beside her. The call ended with Ethan smiling at his phone for another second before slipping it carefully into his jacket pocket. "She wanted to make sure I remember to pick up poster board for her school project tomorrow," he said with a quiet chuckle. "Apparently no science fair can survive without glitter." Charlotte laughed softly. "She sounds wonderful." "She is," Ethan replied. "She makes every difficult day worth getting through." A peaceful silence settled between them as snowflakes drifted gently beneath the streetlights. Neither seemed eager to walk away, yet neither wanted to disturb the quiet comfort that had somehow grown between two strangers in just a few hours. "Would you like to take a short walk?" Charlotte asked. Ethan nodded. "I would." They wandered slowly along the riverwalk, passing couples wrapped in winter coats, families finishing dinner, and musicians packing away their instruments after an evening performance. Chicago felt unusually calm, as if the city itself had decided to whisper instead of shout. Charlotte found herself asking questions she had never asked on a first date. "What is your biggest dream now?" Ethan looked toward the dark water, reflecting hundreds of lights. "Nothing extraordinary. I want Lily to graduate without worrying about student loans. Maybe buy a little house with a backyard where she can have a dog someday. I would like enough work to stop wondering whether the next unexpected bill will ruin the month. That is about it." Charlotte studied his face. There was no bitterness, no resentment, only quiet determination. It amazed her that a man with so little spoke with more gratitude than executives who complained after earning bonuses larger than most families made in a decade. Her own phone suddenly vibrated inside her handbag. She glanced at the screen. 11 missed calls. 6 urgent messages. The name of her executive assistant appeared repeatedly. Another message from the chairman of the board flashed across the display. "Emergency meeting first thing tomorrow morning. European acquisition requires your approval tonight." Charlotte silently locked the screen before Ethan could notice. "Everything all right?" he asked. She smiled gently. "Just word try to remind me that it never sleeps." Ethan nodded with understanding. "You must have an important job." She hesitated for only a heartbeat. "I help manage a company." It was not exactly a lie, but it was far from the truth. Ethan accepted the answer without another question. He simply smiled and said, "I hope whoever works with you knows how fortunate they are." Those words landed harder than Charlotte expected. Thousands of employees depended on her decisions every day, yet no compliment she had received from shareholders or financial analysts had ever sounded as sincere as the one spoken by a mechanic who believed she was simply another professional trying to make a living. As they reached the corner where their cars were parked, Ethan pointed toward an aging blue pickup, dusted with fresh snow. "That old thing has been with me for almost 15 years, he joked. "It rattles every morning, but it always forgives me by the second mile." Charlotte smiled as she admired the truck. At the opposite end of the parking lot waited a modest gray sedan she had rented under her false identity, instead of arriving in one of the chauffeur-driven luxury vehicles that usually followed her schedule. Ethan looked at the sedan and simply said, "Reliable choice." Once again, he showed no interest in appearances. Before saying goodnight, he reached in his coat pocket and pulled out a small folded drawing covered in colorful crayon stars. "Lily slipped this into my pocket before I left tonight," he said with a quiet laugh. "She told me that if I felt nervous, I should remember that somebody already thinks I'm the best dad in the whole world." Charlotte looked at the simple drawing for a long moment, her heart growing unexpectedly heavy. In that instant, she realized she had not spent the evening meeting an ordinary man at all. Without knowing it, she had just met the kind of man that money could never create. Charlotte barely slept that night. The snow outside her penthouse windows reflected the lights of the Chicago skyline, but her thoughts remained inside a modest restaurant where a man in an old navy blazer had spoken about pancakes, school projects, and the quiet joy of raising a daughter. The following morning, her boardroom overlooked 40 floors of glass and steel, where executives discussed mergers worth billions of dollars with polished confidence. Charts filled enormous screens. Financial forecasts stretched years into the future. Charlotte listened politely, signed the necessary documents, and approved decisions that would shape thousands of careers. Yet every pause between. Conversations carried her back to Ethan's simple smile. When the meeting finally ended, she surprised her assistant. "Please clear my afternoon." Her assistant blinked. "You have interviews with 3 investment firms." Charlotte closed her notebook. "Reschedule them." Less than an hour later, she parked the same rented gray sedan outside Walker Auto Service, a small neighborhood garage tucked between an old hardware store and a family-owned bakery. She watched through the office window as Ethan leaned beneath the hood of an aging pickup truck, explaining something patiently to an elderly customer. He pointed to worn hoses, smiled reassuringly, and even laughed when the customer apologized for asking too many questions. There was no rush in his voice. No irritation, only quiet respect. When the customer finally left, Ethan noticed Charlotte standing near the entrance. His surprise quickly became a warm smile. "Claire, this is unexpected." She smiled back. "I was nearby and thought I would see if you wanted to grab lunch." He looked toward the garage where another vehicle waited. "Give me 20 minutes?" "Take your time," she answered. Instead of waiting in the car, Charlotte sat on a weathered wooden bench outside the garage, watching Ethan work. He greeted every customer by name, listened carefully before offering advice, and never suggested repairs that were unnecessary. One young college student looked worried while counting cash from her wallet. Ethan examined her car, tightened a loose battery connection in less than 5 minutes, then smiled. "No charge. Just promise me you will get home safely." The young woman thanked him repeatedly before driving away with visible relief. Charlotte quietly noticed that kindness came naturally to him when nobody was watching. During lunch at a nearby diner, she decided to test something she had been wondering since the night before. When the bill arrived, she reached for it first. Ethan gently stopped her with a smile. "You paid for dessert yesterday." She laughed softly. "Actually, you paid for everything." He shook his head. "Then let me keep my perfect record." She watched him hand over the last few bills from his wallet without hesitation. There was no performance in the gesture, only quiet pride. As they walked back toward the garage, Charlotte casually mentioned that her company happened to be hiring people with mechanical experience. "The benefits are excellent," she said carefully. "Better hours, too." Ethan thanked her sincerely before answering. "That is generous of you to think about me, but I cannot leave right now. My boss gave me a chance when life was falling apart. Loyalty still matters to me." Charlotte said nothing for several moments. She had expected curiosity, perhaps even excitement. Instead, she found something far rarer. Character that refused to bend simply because a better opportunity appeared. As Ethan returned to work, Charlotte remained standing beside her rented sedan, realizing that for the first time in many years, she had met someone who could not be impressed by convenience, influenced by money, or tempted away from his principles. Without saying it aloud, she understood that every hour she spent with Ethan was quietly changing not only the way she saw him, but also the way she saw herself. For the next 2 weeks, their lives settled into a quiet rhythm that neither of them had expected. Charlotte found reasons to stop by the garage after work, sometimes bringing coffee, sometimes simply returning a borrowed book or asking Ethan about a strange noise she claimed to hear from a rental car. Ethan always greeted her with the same warm smile, never questioning why someone with an office job seemed to have so much free time. To him, she was simply Claire, a thoughtful woman who laughed easily and listened more than she spoke. One bright Saturday morning, Charlotte accepted Ethan's invitation to join him and Lily at a neighborhood park where families gathered for a small community picnic. She arrived wearing jeans, white sneakers, and a light blue sweater, blending effortlessly into the crowd. Lily spotted her almost immediately. "Daddy, is that your friend Claire?" she whispered with a grin that made Ethan blush. He nodded. Before he could say another word, Lily ran across the grass and hugged Charlotte around the waist. "I'm glad you came," the little girl said. Charlotte smiled with genuine affection. "I would not have missed it." The morning passed with simple joys that money could never arrange. Ethan helped children fly colorful kites, while Charlotte joined Lily in decorating cookies at a folding table covered with paper cups of frosting and bowls of candy sprinkles. The laughter of families drifted through the crisp spring air, and the scent of grilled hamburgers floated from nearby picnic shelters. Watching Ethan kneel beside Lily as they carefully untangled a kite string, Charlotte realized that happiness often arrived quietly, hidden inside ordinary moments that most people rushed past without noticing. Later that afternoon, Lily tugged gently on Charlotte's sleeve. "Can you help me with something?" she asked. Together, they walked toward a small oak tree where Lily opened her backpack and carefully pulled out a folded sheet of construction paper covered with colorful drawings. "This is my dream house," Lily explained proudly. The picture showed a little white home with flowers, a porch swing, a dog sleeping in the yard, and 3 smiling people holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. Charlotte smiled warmly. "It is beautiful." Lily looked up with complete innocence. "Daddy says dreams take time, but I think they start when good people find each other." Charlotte felt her heart tighten. Children had a remarkable way of speaking truths that adults often complicated. As the afternoon came to an end, Ethan thanked Charlotte for spending the day with them. "You made Lily's weekend," he said. Charlotte shook her head gently. "I think she made mine." That evening, after saying goodbye, Charlotte returned to her penthouse and stood silently beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering skyline. Her assistant entered carrying a folder of weekend reports. "There is one item you should see immediately," she said carefully. Charlotte accepted the folder without concern until a glossy magazine slipped onto the desk. The cover featured her photograph beside the headline announcing one of the largest business acquisitions of the year. Across the room, a television news channel replayed footage from a recent shareholders meeting where Charlotte stood confidently behind a podium, her full name displayed beneath the screen for millions of viewers to see. She stared at the broadcast without moving. The peaceful world she had quietly built with Ethan during the past 2 weeks suddenly felt frighteningly fragile. For the first time since creating the identity of Claire, Charlotte understood that secrets never remained hidden forever, and when the truth finally arrived, it would test something far more valuable than her reputation. Charlotte did not sleep that night. The television remained dark, the city lights shimmered beyond the glass, and the magazine still rested on her desk like a quiet warning she could no longer ignore. She knew it was only a matter of time before Ethan saw her face somewhere outside the carefully protected world she had built around the name Claire. By Monday morning, her schedule had returned to its familiar rhythm of interviews, investor calls, and executive briefings. Yet every conversation felt strangely distant. During a presentation, one of the directors praised the company's record profits. Another celebrated the upcoming expansion into 3 new states. Charlotte heard every word, but none of it reached her heart. When the meeting finally ended, she found herself driving toward Walker Auto Service once again. As she turned onto the familiar street, something immediately felt different. 2 black luxury sport utility vehicles were parked across from the garage. A photographer stood beside the sidewalk pretending to examine his camera while another person spoke quietly into a mobile phone. Charlotte slowed her rented sedan without stopping. She understood exactly what had happened. Someone had followed her. Before she could decide whether to leave, Ethan stepped outside, carrying a small cardboard box of replacement parts. One of the photographers lifted his camera. The shutter clicked several times before Ethan even noticed. He looked around with quiet confusion, clearly wondering why strangers seemed interested in a neighborhood mechanic. Charlotte's heart sank. She drove away before he could see her, hoping the attention would disappear as quickly as it had arrived. It did not. By late afternoon, social media had begun connecting photographs of Charlotte's rented sedan near the garage with recent rumors that the famous chief executive officer had secretly been dating someone outside her social circle. Reporters speculated wildly. Financial bloggers invented stories. Comment sections filled with assumptions from people who had never met either of them. The next morning, Ethan walked into the grocery store after dropping Lily at school. As he reached for a loaf of bread, he noticed two shoppers quietly whispering while glancing in his direction. At the checkout counter, a newspaper headline displayed Charlotte's smiling photograph beside a story questioning the mysterious man who had recently entered her life. Ethan stared at the article for several silent seconds. His groceries suddenly felt much heavier than they had a moment earlier. He returned to his pickup without opening the newspaper, but curiosity lingered in his mind. That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep, Ethan searched Charlotte Kensington's name on his aging laptop. Within seconds, hundreds of photographs filled the screen. Magazine covers, charity events, international conferences, television interviews. There she was, wearing elegant business suits, standing beside presidents, governors, and world-famous entrepreneurs. The woman he knew as Claire smiled from every headline. Ethan leaned back slowly in his chair. The quiet apartment seemed even quieter than usual. He replayed every conversation they had shared, every walk beside the river, every simple lunch, every gentle smile. None of those moments had been false, yet she had never told him who she really was. He closed the laptop and rested his hands on the kitchen table. There was no anger in his eyes, only sadness mixed with understanding. He whispered softly into the stillness, almost as though speaking to himself. "You must have had your reasons." Outside, a cold evening breeze stirred the wind chimes hanging from the small apartment balcony, filling the silence with gentle notes. Ethan looked toward Lily's bedroom door before making a quiet decision. Whatever happened next, he would not allow his ordinary life to become a burden for the woman he had quietly come to love. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the garage earlier than usual. The sun had barely risen above the rooftops, and a thin layer of dew shimmered across the parked cars waiting for repair. He unlocked the shop, switched on the lights, and quietly began organizing his tools. Every familiar movement brought a sense of calm, yet his thoughts refused to settle. Charlotte Kensington. The name no longer belonged only to television interviews and magazine covers. It belonged to the woman who had laughed over apple pie, helped Lily decorate cookies, and listened patiently to stories about ordinary dreams. Those memories felt real, even if one important truth had been hidden. Around 9 o'clock, a black luxury sedan pulled into the empty customer parking area. Charlotte stepped out alone, wearing a simple beige coat instead of the elegant business attire the world expected from her. There were no photographers, no assistants, and no security team. Ethan looked up from the engine he had been repairing and quietly removed his work gloves. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the garage heater and the distant sound of passing traffic filled the silence between them. Charlotte finally took a slow breath. "I owe you the truth." Ethan nodded gently. "You do." She looked directly into his eyes. "Everything you learned about me yesterday is true. I am Charlotte Kensington. I never wanted to deceive you. I only wanted one chance to meet someone who saw me before seeing my last name." Ethan listened without interruption. She continued with a trembling voice that carried none of the confidence admired in boardrooms. "Every man I dated already knew who I was before saying hello. Some admire my success. Others admired my bank account. None of them ever asked me how my day had been. None of them cared whether I was lonely. You were the first person who simply treated me like another human being." Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment before answering. "You should have trusted me with the truth." Charlotte nodded slowly. "I know. I was afraid." "Of what?" he asked quietly. "That once you knew who I really was, you would stop seeing Claire." A gentle breeze drifted through the open garage door, carrying the scent of fresh coffee from the bakery next door. Ethan rested one hand on the workbench and smiled sadly. Claire was never the problem. Claire was kind. Claire laughed at terrible jokes. Claire cared about my daughter. I do not know what to do with Charlotte Kensington because everyone else seems to want something from her. Tears gathered in Charlotte's eyes, though her voice remained steady. I do not want you to want anything from me except the truth. Before Ethan could answer, Lily's school bus stopped across the street. It was an early dismissal for teacher training day. The little girl stepped off the bus carrying her backpack and immediately spotted Charlotte standing beside the garage. Her face brightened with innocent excitement. She ran across the sidewalk and wrapped her arms around Charlotte without the slightest hesitation. "Claire," she laughed, "Daddy said you were busy this week. I missed you." Charlotte knelt and hugged her tightly, unable to hide the emotion in her eyes. Lily looked up at Ethan with complete sincerity. "Daddy, are we still friends with Claire?" Ethan looked at his daughter, then at the woman quietly holding back tears beside her. In that simple moment, the noise of headlines, fortune, and public opinion suddenly seemed very small. He realized that the person standing before him was not asking to be admired as one of the wealthiest women in America. She was asking for something far more difficult. She was asking for a second chance to be known simply as herself. Ethan looked at Lily's hopeful face before meeting Charlotte's eyes once more. And in that quiet moment, he understood that trust was not rebuilt through perfect explanations, but through honest choices made one day at a time. He smiled gently at his daughter. "Yes, sweetheart, we are still friends with Claire." Lily clapped her hands with innocent delight before running inside the garage to show everyone the ribbon she had earned at school. Charlotte let out a slow breath she had not realized. She had been holding. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan shook his head softly. "Do not thank me yet. Trust takes time." Charlotte nodded. "Then I will give it all the time it needs." Over the following weeks, she stopped trying to impress him with grand gestures. She visited the garage whenever she could, sometimes bringing homemade soup that she had proudly learned to cook from one of Lily's favorite recipe books, sometimes simply sitting on the old wooden bench while Ethan finished his work. She attended Lily's school art show without informing reporters or assistants. She applauded louder than anyone when Lily proudly displayed a watercolor painting of a small white house beneath a bright blue sky. At the annual neighborhood charity fair, Charlotte quietly volunteered beside Ethan, serving meals, arranging donated books, and helping children choose free backpacks for the upcoming school year. Most people never recognized the woman standing behind the folding table with rolled-up sleeves and comfortable sneakers. Those who eventually did were surprised to discover that she seemed happiest when nobody treated her like the most powerful person in the room. One crisp autumn afternoon, Ethan invited Charlotte and Lily to visit a small piece of land on the edge of town. Wildflowers swayed gently in the breeze, and an aging oak tree stood near the center of the open field. Ethan smiled as Lily raced ahead with joyful excitement. "I have been saving for years," he admitted. "Not enough to build today, maybe not even next year, but someday I want our little house to stand right here." Charlotte looked across the quiet property before reaching into her coat pocket. Ethan noticed the small velvet box in her hand and immediately smiled with amused confusion. "Charlotte," he laughed softly, "if that is what I think it is, you are definitely doing this backwards." She laughed through happy tears. "Probably." She opened the box to reveal a simple silver ring, elegant without being extravagant. "I've spent years buying impressive things," she said quietly. "None of them ever gave me peace. Then I met a father who measured success by bedtime stories, pancake breakfasts, and a little girl who believed he could fix almost anything. Ethan, you never asked for my fortune. You only offered me honesty, respect, and a place where I could finally stop pretending. I do not need someone to rescue me. I only hope you will let me walk beside you for the rest of our lives." Ethan stood silently for a moment as the afternoon breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves across the field. Finally, he closed the ring box gently, slipped it back into Charlotte's hand, and smiled with the same quiet warmth that had first captured her heart. "One condition," he said. She looked at him curiously. "Anything." He nodded toward Lily, who was gathering colorful leaves beneath the oak tree. "When we tell this story someday, Everyone needs to know that the richest woman in America proposed first. Charlotte laughed so freely that even Lily turned around smiling without knowing why. Ethan accepted the ring, slipped it onto his finger, and wrapped his arm around the woman who had once hidden behind another name. Together they walked toward Lily beneath the golden afternoon light, leaving behind titles, headlines, and expectations. In the end, the greatest fortune neither of them found was measured in dollars. It was found in quiet dignity, second chances, and the simple courage to love someone for who they truly were.